Hello, everyone. I hope you could hear that song. I think it was playing a little low, but it's called Elvis is Everywhere by Mojo Nixon. He died last year, but you might ask why Elvis, and I would ask you why not Elvis. But also, think about it. Who's inspired more fakes than Elvis? Nobody. All right. So welcome everyone to tonight's California Live. I'm Pat Joseph, editor of California Magazine, editorially independent publication of the Cal Alumni Association. By the way, I have a really bad cold, so you got to root for me. We got to get through this together. On behalf of the association and our co-hosts, the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive, I'd like to welcome you all here tonight for our talk about deepfakes and disinformation, featuring our distinguished guest, Professor Hany Farid, one of the world's leading experts on the subject. Before I introduce him, I want to let you know that we're going to do things just a little bit differently than in past episodes of California Live. Because this is a very visual topic, we think it's important for you to see a few slides before we start. And after that, then we'll sit down to talk. If you have questions, hopefully you got index cards and can write your questions out on those. Around the 7:10 mark, I'll have you pass those to the ushers, and then my colleagues will choose some of those to share with me. And there will also be a short reception afterward, and you'll have a chance to ask questions then as well. Okay, so to the introduction, Professor Hany Farid has a joint appointment in the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Sciences and the Berkeley School of Information, EECS and the iSchool, as they like to say here. He's also a member of the Berkeley Artificial Intelligence Lab, the Berkeley Institute for Data Science, and he's a senior faculty advisor for the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity. His research focuses on digital forensics, forensic science, misinformation, image analysis, and human perception. And it's really no stretch to say that he's the go-to expert on all things relating to deepfakes. When I was doing research for tonight's topic, I just kept running into Hany Farid talking to me on YouTube and over CNN and whatever, so he's everywhere, like Elvis. Before coming to Cal, Hany was on faculty at Dartmouth College for 2 decades, and tomorrow, he and his wife, who's in the audience tonight, return to Vermont on sabbatical, just in time to watch the leaves change, and also they'll be celebrating the fact that Emily Cooper got tenure. So congratulate her. She's on the faculty of the School of Optometry and Vision Science. Okay, so with that, please welcome Professor Hany Farid.
I love that Pat didn't just embarrass me, but he embarrassed Emily as well. That's really nice. And I don't think I've ever been compared to Elvis, so that's pretty good. We're 2 for 2, Pat. So I realize you want to come here and hear us have a conversation, and you will, but when I was talking to Pat about thinking about this setup, I thought it'd be good to just show you some things about where we are in terms of generative AI and deepfakes to sort of level set us, because this is a very fast-moving space. One of the great things about being a professor is you put a talk together and you get a good 2-3 years out of it. I mean, it's a gift. But these days, no kidding, 2 to 3 weeks, and I've got to change my slides, and I'm really sort of irritated by that. So where are we in terms of deepfakes? Let me see if I can get the clicker to work. I cannot. Okay. So I think it's important to understand that fundamentally the ability to alter photographic, audio, and video record is not new. We have been doing this for as long as we have been recording visual media. So go back to the 1920s. Stalin famously airbrushed people out of photos who fell out of favor. Now, first, I have a lot of thoughts about this, but I only have 15 minutes, so you can ask me questions later. But to do this was highly skilled. First of all, you had to have a camera. You had to have a darkroom. You had to be able to go into the darkroom, paint on the negative, re-expose it, and then what would you do with it? There was no Twitter. You would just change the history books. And so the idea here is that you can alter history, but not so much the future. 100 years, the photographic record, many of the famous Civil War photos, the most iconic photo of Abraham Lincoln are all composites or manipulated in some ways. Now, fast forward almost 100 years, we are now in the very early days of the digital revolution. Right? The internet is bubbling up, social media is bubbling up, we're starting to have digital cameras in our pockets that are quite powerful, and we start to have things like Photoshop that allow us to alter that digital media. In 2010, that photo on the bottom there was released by the Iranian news agency that showcased 3 mid-range missiles being launched as part of a threat to their neighbors. One of them misfired, and they didn't like that. And so what they did is they photoshopped in a 4th missile. Pretty crude, and if you look at the clouds, you can actually see a repeating pattern between the 2 clouds. But in 2010, this really stunned people that we could do this kind of thing. And it is nothing compared to what you can do today. Today, you can go to any of a dozen web services that you are either free or you pay a few bucks for, and you type, give me, by the way, whenever I ask ChatGPT for something, I always say, please. And I think that's really weird. But Sarah, one of my students, told me a really good idea, which is you should do this because when the AI overlords come, they will remember that you were nice to them. And I thought that was really good advice. Please give me an image of a power plant exploding. Wait 5 seconds, and it will generate that. And think about the democratization of technology from the 1920s in terms of capture and manipulation through the early noughts to where we are today. That is phenomenal, what you can do today. Only limited by your imagination, you can generate almost any image. So what has happened is not fundamentally we can manipulate media, it's that we've democratized access. It went from a handful to state-sponsored actors to 8 billion people in the world can now do this. And that is really interesting. So where are we in terms of generative AI? So we spend a lot of time, and you'll hear about this when we're talking, thinking about how you detect these things, but we also spend a lot of times creating it. So you can go to any number of web services and type, young Americans walking happily in a parade, patriotic, holding signs that say, Harris Walls 2024. This is an image that came out. I just found it on social media almost immediately after Harris Walls were announced as the ticket. And look at that image, fully AI generated. No camera, no Photoshop, nothing. The words are correct. Look at the reflection on her glasses. It's incredible. I mean, it's incredibly beautiful. And this was not possible 6 months ago. You couldn't do this 6 months ago. You couldn't even come close. And the trajectory just continues. It's phenomenal trajectory. We say that Gen AI images are passing through the uncanny valley. They are becoming so realistic that a passive viewing of them is almost impossible to distinguish from reality. Voices are also very, very good. So it used to be 2 years ago, I needed 8 hours of audio recording to clone somebody's voice, which meant things like reporters, Joe Rogans of the world, politicians of the world were vulnerable to having their voices cloned, but you and I were not. Today, 20 seconds of audio, I can go to a service that I pay $5 a month for, and I can clone a voice. So I'm going to play for you the voice of Mayor Khan, not anybody particularly famous, and he's got a nice British accent. And then I'm going to show you a clone voice. So listen to his voice and hear the intonation of what his voice sounds like.
But I think this takes the biscuit. It's just such bad taste. It just reminds everyone.
OK, so that's Mayor Khan. I got it off of YouTube. I put it into a service I pay $5 a month for, and I cloned his voice. And then I had him say, and then I type, and I have him say whatever I want.
I am told that on the issue of deepfakes, one of the world's leading experts is Professor Hany Farid. Having spent some time with him, however, I can tell you that he is a bit of a dipshit.
The deepfakes giveth and they taketh. And this is what happens when you ask your students to make things for you. It is amazing. Sarah, who's sitting right there, a PhD student in my lab, just finished a perceptual study. People are pretty close to chance distinguishing real from fake audio. They are passing through the uncanny valley. They are really, really good. And I need 20 seconds of your voice to clone it. That's amazing. Video is also incredible. I'm going to play for a video for you, and then I'm going to tell you what it is.
But you can imagine I have a lot of questions. So I'd love to begin with you, firstly, just because I read that you started out in advertising, and now you run a wellness business.
That is a fully AI-generated video that had one image of the person as input, that's what you see in the lower left-hand corner, and an audio stream, either real or synthesized. And it made that, it's incredible. The hair moves, you can see the muscles in the throat moving, the facial expressions move consistent with what she is saying. That is incredible. Videos are passing also through the uncanny valley. So now videos of people talking, moving, dancing, doing whatever are becoming indistinguishable from reality. This is one of my favorite examples. Everything I've described to you is what we call asynchronous creation. You go to a service, you type something in, you wait a few seconds, and you get a result. We can also create these deepfakes in real time. So I'm going to play a video for you. This is a Zoom call that I recorded in my office. That's in South Hall with one of my students. That's Elliot. I'm going to play the video for you, and then I'm going to tell you what you're seeing.
All we are is dust in the wind, dude.
So that's the real Elliot. Keanu Reeves with a Keanu Reeves deepfake. He is doing that in real time at 30 frames per second on his laptop using open source software. So this just in, you can be on a video call with somebody and you will not be 100% sure who that is. That's weird. That's really, really weird. Okay, so why should we be worried about this? First of all, lots of cool things you can do with this. It's a content creator's dream. There's really beautiful things you can do with this as a creator, somebody who is artistic, wants to be a filmmaker, but doesn't have $100 million to create a film. It's incredible. It's incredible technology. But as soon as this technology started getting created, we started seeing bad people doing bad things with it. And so let me just give you a couple of examples of that. This is probably one of the most dramatic ones. It was over a year ago, in May of 2023. Somebody created that fake image of the Pentagon being bombed, and they published it on Twitter, X, I suppose. And it was on a blue check-marked account that was paid $7 a month for that made it look like a Bloomberg News story. The stock market in 2 minutes dropped $500 billion because people panicked before they figured out it was fake. Was it intentional? Was it stock manipulation? Was it state-sponsored actors? Nobody knows, right? $500 billion in 2 minutes went bye-bye. I got a call from CNN. By the time I got back to my office to look at the image, it was over, right? In January of this year, Taylor Swift had made some comments about the upcoming election. Some people were angered by that and started creating horrific, horrific images of her and sexually explicit material and carpet bombing the internet with it. Awful, awful things can happen, and not just to people like Taylor Swift, but to every single person in this room, because if I have a single image of you, I can now insert you into videos of anybody else's doing whatever. And that is a huge threat to people like Taylor Swift, but also to individuals as well. We've seen phenomenal, spectacular financial fraud. This is an amazing one from earlier this year. A worker in Hong Kong was on a live video call, like what I just showed you. He thought he was talking to his chief financial officer and ended up transferring $25 million. That was not the first one. It will not be the last one. This is at least the dozenth one that I've heard about this, where tens of millions of dollars are being stolen through very sophisticated scams. We're in political season. I know. So many jokes here, so little time. Lots of images like this are circulating on Facebook, trying to paint candidates in a more positive light with a certain constituency. We're seeing massive amounts of political disinformation on social media, on X, on YouTube, on Twitter, and it's a real problem for us as a democracy. And it's not just here in the US. 2 billion people are voting this year. We are seeing these manipulations everywhere in the global south, in Western Europe, in Asia. We are seeing these problems with disinformation campaigns that are now being fueled or jet fueled with deepfakes. This is a really fascinating one. There's this new scam where people are applying for jobs and doing interviews over Zoom as imposters. And they are either hackers from North Korea, they are people who are just cyber criminals trying to get into companies and insert malware or ransomware, and it is working. The FBI has now issued multiple reports about imposter hiring that if you are interviewing people over Zoom, you need to be exceedingly careful because you don't know who you're talking to anymore. It's a weird world we're living in. In the UK right now, we are seeing horrific unrest and violence in the streets, almost entirely being fueled by misinformation and disinformation and fake images and fake audio meant to create divisions in society. We are using this technology to further distance ourselves from people we don't like or disagree with. What we spend a lot of time, and what you're going to hear us talking a little bit about, is how we detect these. I couldn't help myself. I put an equation on the slide, sorry. And I'm not gonna, this is not a big lecture, I swear to God, this is my second to last slide. But I wanted to give you a flavor for how we think about detecting these, mainly to just explain how incredibly complicated it can be, that it's not an easy problem. So this is an image I took. I recently did a road trip to Nevada to do a hike with some friends. This is a photo from the street level as we were hitting the range. And when you take a photo, when you pick up your camera and record it, you are transferring photons in the world to a digital signal. And you're using a camera to do that. And there are imperfections when you do that. So there are two main types of imperfections when you generate an image, what we call additive noise and what we call multiplicative noise. This noise takes every pixel, the actual number of photons that you want, and modifies them by small amounts by adding or subtracting values. Okay? And that is what we call stochastic, means every time you take a photo, you get a different amount of noise. And it just has to do with sort of the temperature and the sensor and all kinds of things that are happening that are just random in nature. Okay, and so we know that. This one's interesting. This is a multiplicative noise pattern. This one does the following. The top left pixel, every time I take a photo with my camera, will slightly overrepresent how much light came in. And then the next pixel will slightly underrepresent it. And that is unique to my camera, not an iPhone camera, but literally with my serial number. We have put people in jail with this pattern. We have linked people to photographs that they have taken from a device to an image and said, this camera took this photo because it's unique, like a DNA signature. Those two patterns emerge from a physical process. Right? And when you synthesize an image, you are not going through a physical process. You're going through something extremely synthetic and artificial. And so when we look at those noise patterns for generative AI images, that's the bottom row here and those two on the right, they look very different than this one. So these are visual depictions, I won't get into the details of what it is, of the noise patterns. And without even knowing what this is, you can see big, fat, whopping differences between what real images look like, top left, and what synthetic images look like. They have really strange patterns that are not immediately obvious when you look at the image. This is one of many, many, many different techniques. And so the last thing I'm going to say about this before I stop is I wish I could tell you, just looking at things, look for these artifacts, and you'll be able to tell the difference. I could do that today, but in 3 weeks, they won't work anymore. And now you'll have a false sense of security. So what we spend a lot of time thinking about is how do we develop these techniques, constantly evolving them over time, and trying to help us figure out what's real and what's not, because things are getting pretty weird out there, and there's a lot to be excited about, but I think there's a lot to be scared about. So I think now we're going to talk about what to be scared about. Okay?
That was great. I think I should have just let you keep going. But so if my daughter calls from college and she's in distress and asking for money,
you need a code word.
Hang up?
No, yes, absolutely hang up.
Okay.
You need a code word. By the way, this happened to me. I was working a case with a pretty high-profile lawyer, and he got a phone call from somebody that sounded like me from my phone number, and they were talking about the case, and he got suspicious. Picked up another phone and called me, and he said, "Are you on the line right now?" And it was somebody who was impersonating my voice in real time. So we have a code word. I can't think of it right now, by the way, so we'll have to remind me what it is later. You should have a code word with your family members. You have to remember what it is so you don't hang up when it's, you know.
So that's not just paranoia talking.
No, that's just common sense now.
Okay.
Yeah, and by the way, if you are at a bank that is using voice biometrics to authenticate you, you should move your money right now. Banks are getting hacked with biometric identification. You should set up two-form authentication. It is the only thing that is even reasonably secure right now.
So being in this world and this being your focus of study, has it, though, made you more paranoid?
Yeah. Like, really, it's weird. Like, I get on calls with people, and I'm suspicious of them.
Oh, yeah, talk about talking to Obama.
Okay. So this is going to sound like a flex, and it is, but it's actually an interesting story. So Maddie, who's sitting right here, one of my students, was in my office when I took a call with President Obama. So last year, he wanted to get smart about generative AI. He was advising the Biden White House. And it's weird to get on a Zoom call with Obama. It's just the two of us and his chief of staff. And he gets on, and it's Obama. And I'm just like does that? 10 minutes, I was freaked out. I'm like, somebody's pranking me. And it was weird. And I was really skeptical. I finally met him in person. That made me, I felt more comfortable about that. But yeah, it's almost everything I look at, I'm immediately suspicious of it now.
I think you told me earlier that when his hand crossed his
Yeah,
face,
so
that
this
was a
is,
kind of
yeah, so right now, deepfakes struggle when your hand goes in front of your face. And at some point he did this, and I relaxed a little bit.
Yeah, what is it with hands? Artists can't do hands very easily, and AI seems to struggle.
It's getting better at it. So hands are really complicated. Yeah. I mean, the human body is incredibly complicated, but hands are really, like all the joints and the way they're configured. And anybody who's an artist knows that rendering hands are really, really hard. AI struggled for a long time with hands. That problem is basically solved. There's a new engine out there called Flux. Okay. That seems to have fixed the hands. They got it. It was just a matter of time. We know. By the way, can I say, there's somebody who's a genius out there. I went to Amazon one day and I saw this thing. It was a prosthetic finger that you would attach to your hand, and then when somebody took a photo of you, they would think it was AI generated. I just thought this was genius because a lot of AI generated images created extra fingers, and I just thought that was genius.
Well, before we get too much into this, I really want to know how you arrived at being the guy on deepfakes. I'm guessing that in 1988, when you graduated from college, that was not where you expected to go.
Yeah. So I love this question because I love telling this story to students because it tells you how science and, frankly, life works. So I had finished my PhD. I was a postdoc. And this is how long ago it was. I was at the library getting a book. Which is how long ago it was. And I was waiting in the line, and the line wasn't moving, and so I picked up this random book on the return cart, and it was the Federal Rules of Evidence. And I had no godly earth reason to be reading this book, but I just literally opened it to a random page, and the title of the chapter was Introducing Photographs into a Court of Law. And I'd been interested in photography, and I'd been thinking about computer vision, and I'm like, oh, I wonder what the rules are. And so I started reading, and it said film and 35mm negatives and prints thereof, all of those are admissible. And my memory, it was a footnote, but it was probably parenthetical. It said, there's this new format called digital, and we are going to treat digital images exactly the same way we treat 35mm negatives. And I thought, well, that's really dumb, because they're not the same. They're inherently malleable. And this was in 1997. So really very early days, but we knew digital was coming. And I went back to my office and I just started noodling this idea. Like, what would you do? Like, how would you authenticate it? And I couldn't shake it. And a couple years went by. I had moved up to Hanover, New Hampshire to start my first job as an academic. And I had a friend I was playing tennis with, and every weekend he'd kick my butt, and I hated him. And so to set up a tennis date for us to play, I took a picture of Andre Agassi, and I took my friend's face and I spliced it into the image. Yeah. And when I did that, I did a very specific manipulation. I had to make his head a little bit bigger. And I realized, that's going to leave an artifact that I can quantify and measure. And then I went next door to my office and I told the student, I said, you want to do something really crazy? And he said, yes. And that was the beginning of it. And that's how science works. It's incredibly serendipitous. And it's random. And that was 25 years ago. And this is what I've basically been doing for 25 years now. And I started doing it way before I should have.
Yeah.
Like this was, nobody saw the generative AI. Like we saw the digital. And this was a much more bespoke, narrow field. And then has exploded thanks to generative AI.
Which is really just the last
5 years.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think the term deepfake hit about 5 years ago, but really the last 2 years in terms of really popular and very much in the vernacular.
And it's deepfake because it's deep machine learning. Do I have that right? And
yeah.
And that means.
Yeah. So the underlying technology behind everything I showed you is what's called deep learning. And so the term deepfake actually comes from a moniker of a Reddit user who was using this technology to make sexually explicit material. So I don't like the term a lot. Generative AI is the rebranding by Silicon Valley because nobody wanted to use the term deepfake. And it's a really good rebranding, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you made a deep fake. The first thing you did with the technology was make a fake.
Yeah, I mean, like I would say a third of our time is making fakes. If you're going to be in the business of detecting this stuff, you gotta be in the business of making these things.
Yeah.
We're pretty careful with what we do with them. We don't release them, but yeah, we spend a lot of time making fake stuff, and usually it's just people calling me, bad things.
As you say, it leaves artifact. There's something that you can spot.
There's always something. And one of the great things about generative AI is it's fundamentally a statistical inference engine. It's fundamentally looking at the statistical distribution of images, audio, and video. And so it's doing something that is statistically similar. But that means it doesn't know about cameras. It doesn't know about lights. It doesn't know about 3D geometry. And it makes actually a lot of mistakes that are not physically plausible, but that your visual system doesn't really care about. And so a lot of what we do is we look for those failures. So that was one example that I showed you. Other ones are things like shadows move in really weird ways, reflections. Like I can see a reflection on your glasses right now from the table. Those tend to be a little wonky. But I would say almost everything we develop has a shelf life.
Yeah.
If we're lucky, we get a couple years out of it, and then we have to shutter it and move on to the next one.
And am I right that these get better because of this, what do they call it, adversarial learning networks?
It's a combination of things that they're getting better. So first, the data on which they're being trained keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the more data you have, we know the better that they get. The underlying algorithms are getting better. So in some cases, that's because commercial entities have started to monetize this, and once you pour billions of dollars, obviously the technology is going to get better. And then the other reason is a lot of these have huge, massive open source communities where people are just piling on and doing better and better. And then there's some algorithmic improvements. But it's doing exactly what you expect it to be doing. Every few months it gets better, cheaper, and easier to use. And people are finding clever and not so clever ways to use it.
Yeah. Do you see a day, though, when it gets so good that even just, software won't be able to find these deceptions?
I really don't like this question, but it's the right question to ask. My only hope is I will have retired before that happens. The less snarky answer is I don't think so, and here's why. First of all, video is incredibly complicated. You've got 30 frames a second. You've got the audio track. That is a lot of data that you have to get pixel perfect. And that is really, really hard. I mean, maybe if we have quantum computers in our back pockets 20 years from now and we have, computing that we can't imagine, maybe. But here's the good news about the generative AI space, with a few exceptions, is the OpenAIs, the Anthropics, the Midjourneys, they're not setting out to burn the place to the ground. They may do that, but that's not what they're setting out to do. So they're not really my adversary the way somebody creates malware and ransomware is my adversary, right? Somebody who's a malware creator is trying to cause damage. I don't think you can say that about OpenAI. So they're not actually particularly incentivized to create something that is pixel perfect that we cannot distinguish from reality. And I take some comfort in that maybe there's some hope there that we'll be able to keep up.
Not to feed your paranoia, but do you think a state actor might develop its own generative AI?
100%.
Okay.
In fact, I'd be surprised if they have not already.
Okay.
I think you should expect that our adversaries at the state-sponsored are absolutely doing this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Are you surprised that we haven't seen more deepfakes in this election cycle?
Well, I've seen a lot of them. I think the question, and I think you're going to start to see more, by the way, and I'll tell you there's a couple reasons for it. One is Elon Musk has gone off the deep end. That is contributing to this. And we should talk, by the way, about social media, because this is not fundamentally just a generative AI problem. This is a social media problem. The problem isn't just you can create this stuff. It's that you can carpet bomb the internet with it, and then people like Elon Musk will amplify it. So one of the good things about the OpenAI, Midjourney, Anthropic, is that they have some pretty good guardrails on the generative AI for images and audio and video. You can't go there and say, give me an image of, and then think of the most obscene thing imaginable. It will stop you from doing that. But, of course, are we recording this?
Yes.
I have tenure.
Do you want them to stop?
It's fine. So what did Elon Musk do? He unleashed Grok, which is a ChatGPT without guardrails, and he unleashed Flux, which is an image generator without guardrails. And of course he did. And so I think, and that was just released a few weeks ago. So a lot of the nasty, nasty stuff that you started to see on Twitter, on X right now, is because we now have these generative AI without guardrails. And I think it's going to get worse.
Yeah.
And you're starting to see some pretty ugly things.
Yeah.
And I think it will get worse. We probably saw the first impact of an election with deepfakes, but you may not have heard about it because it was in Slovakia. So earlier this year in Slovakia, 48 hours before the election, the pro-NATO candidate was up 4 points in front of the pro-Putin candidate. Somebody created a deepfake of the pro-NATO candidate. saying that we're going to rig this election and win it one way or another. And it went viral online. And because there's this bizarre thing in Slovakia that says you can't talk about the election 48 hours before Election Day, nobody could go in and clean up the record. 2 days later, the pro-Putin candidate won by 4 points. That's an 8-point swing in a country that neighbors Ukraine to its east, by the way, not for nothing. That's pretty serious. Right. We probably saw an impact in India, but probably down ticket, not at the top of the ticket. And so that's the other thing too, is do I think deepfakes will impact this election? I think in a couple of ways, but I'm also worried about down ticket. But here's where I think you're going to see the impact, and you're already seeing this. This was the better part of the last few weeks, was talking to reporters about these images of Harris at big rallies with huge crowds, tens of thousands of people showing up, and this infuriated Donald Trump. And so he started saying the photos were fake. Deepfakes work both ways. It's not just that you can create fake things and hurt people, you can deny reality. And the question you want to ask yourself is, why is he doing this? Well, it could just be pettiness. He doesn't like the crowds are bigger than his crowds. That's a perfectly valid reason. I think it's way worse than that. I think what he's doing is he's setting the stage to deny the outcome of the election. And how do you do that? And by the way, I'm not making that up. He has told us that he's going to do this. And the easiest way to do that is to say, look, she couldn't have gotten those votes because those crowds are fake, right? And so I think you are seeing this by the poisoning of the information ecosystem, both by state-sponsored actors, which is absolutely happening, by the campaigns, by the candidates, and by sociopathic CEOs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the title of the event is, what if seeing is no longer believing? And I guess that gets to this point that things don't have to be fake. If it's plausible that things could be faked,
yeah,
you can claim it's fake.
Yeah, it's called liar's dividend. It goes both ways, that once we live in a world where you can make images and audio and video, nothing is real. I'll give you an example of how fast the landscape has shifted. In 2016, then candidate Trump got caught on the Access Hollywood tape, saying some really awful things about women. I mean, even by Trump standards, these were bad. And what did he do? He apologized. You go back and check. He actually said, I'm sorry, which was pretty amazing by today's standards. Now, fast forward a year. Somehow he wins election. Fast forward a year, and he's asked about the tape. And now deep fakes are just on the rise, and he says, oh, it's fake. Why'd you apologize in the first place? Doesn't matter. It's fake. Right? Who's accountable anymore? Police violence, human rights violations, politicians doing and saying things, everything is fake suddenly.
Yeah.
And how do we move forward as a society if we can't agree on basic? We can disagree on lots of things. I'm fine with disagreeing on things. I like disagreeing on things. But we've got to agree that 2 + 2 is 4. I don't know how, and so to me, if we don't have a shared sense of reality, this is an existential threat to our society. And I'll give you some numbers that should, if you're not already terrified, should terrify you. I asked for bourbon up at the front here instead of the water, but I got water. 20% of Americans, 20% believe that Bill Gates created COVID to put a tracking device in them. And that maps with the number of people who are not getting vaccinated, not just for COVID, by the way, 20%. By the way, I want to ask these people why Bill Gates has to put a tracking device in them if we all have phones in our pockets. Like what? I don't even understand this theory. It's fine. 30% roughly of Americans believe that climate change is a hoax. Not that it's not created by man, not how to respond to it, that it is a hoax, okay? 1 in 2, 50% of Republicans believe that Donald Trump won the election in 2020. So think about what I said enumerated: public health, climate, democracy. How do we move forward? This is not fun and games anymore, but here's the big one, that with those conspiracies, which are hitting a significant number of our fellow Americans, comes something else. That you don't just believe those things that are factually incorrect or have no foundation. It's that you also believe that the government, the media, that's you, and the scientific experts, that me, are in on it, that we are keeping information from you. And so you have a distrust of the very institutions that we need to function as a society: government, scientific experts, and media. We need some more people, don't get me wrong, but you definitely need those people. And that's what scares me, is that it's this overall distrust of institutions that comes along with this. And I can tell you that, because we've been mapping out these conspiracies, it used to be the flat earthers, the Elvis is alive, 9/11, the birther. Those numbers were typically in the single percentage points, right? Somewhere between 4 and 9%. Now we are in the 20 to 50%. This is not fun and games anymore. Yeah. This has real consequences to us as a society.
So part of what I think I promised from this talk is that we would have some things we can do about it.
Well, that was silly of you. No, I'm going to be helpful. Okay, a couple things. Stop, for the love of God, getting your information from social media. I mean, this one's easy, honestly. Like, just turn it off. You'll be so much better off for it. Facebook, Twitter, get rid of it all of it, gone. In fact, if I could, I'd unplug the internet, but I'm going to be reasonable. So we do need to teach people, you and I were talking about this earlier on, that this was designed to get reliable information. That's not what it's designed for, but that's what we're using it for. The majority of Americans use social media to get information, and that is devastating. And I wouldn't say it's an easy fix, but it's not a technical, it's just an education thing. That's number one. Number two is, on the technology side, what is so hard about what we do is we're basically a postmortem. We come in and clean up the bodies after it's over. And that's important, right? We should have facts. We should figure out what happened. But honestly, we're cleaning up the mess. By the time I see something, millions of people have already seen it online. And I can't get them to unsee it. But there's some cool technology that's coming down the pike. So there's an organization I'm involved with called the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authentication. It's a Linux Foundation, open source, multi-stakeholder, and has industry people, academics, not-for-profits, journalists. And what they are doing is building a technology, I guess what we are doing is building a technology that at the point of creation of an OpenAI, for example, it will add signatures into the media that is being created that will automatically identify it as AI generated. In fact, right now you can see this technology in place. If you go over to OpenAI and you generate an image, say please, when you do that, DALL-E images from OpenAI will have what's called a content credential associated with it. And if you upload this, and you can see that, we can see it, but also if you upload that to LinkedIn, it will tag it as AI generated. And it's the first proof of concept from what we call glass to glass. The first piece of glass is the creation, and the last piece of glass is you consuming it. We now have content credentials that identify things. I call these necessary but not sufficient conditions, right? It's like putting warning labels on tobacco. That was good, but it didn't stop people from smoking. So I think that's important that you know what you're looking at, like a nutrition label. You can still eat potato chips, but you should know that they are very, very bad for you. So I really like that technology, but it requires the cooperation of the OpenAIs, the Anthropics, and the Midjourneys, and Elon Musk, which I don't have a lot of hope for. So in this world, we're only as good as the lowest common denominator, right? And yeah, okay, you know where that's going. It used to be Mark Zuckerberg, now it's Elon Musk, go figure.
I'm going to pause for 1 second. If you have questions that you've written out, I'm going to ask you to pass them this direction. And I think the ushers can collect those.
I just want to say my wife is writing a question, so don't pick that one, please.
Yeah. She's working hard on it, too. She should just bring that straight to me.
Yeah, she's going to hand it to you.
Yeah, so the questions should go down here to my colleagues. Great. So the last talk was with Stuart Russell.
Yeah.
Stuart.
He probably scared the bejesus out of you, too.
Yeah. It was strangely funny, though. Yeah.
Well, what else are you going to do but laugh?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, but part of what I brought up with Stuart was that the field of computer science and the AI world is so divided between the people who are saying it's going to be the end of us and those who say, no, it's going to solve climate change and we're going to live forever. And I think it's hard to get people to go out on a limb, but I would like you to go out on a limb.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I'm somewhere in between. There are absolutely people saying, well, I would say there's other people saying this is complete nonsense and none of this works and it's all hype and it's complete crap. I think they're wrong. I think there is really something happening that is very dramatic. I was just talking to some of my students earlier that I've been doing this for 25 years, both teaching and a practitioner of computer science. I don't think I've seen a technology in such a short amount of time fundamentally change the way I work and the way I think and the way I think about teaching the next generation of computer scientists. Something very dramatic is happening. And I don't think we fully understand what it is yet. So I don't think it's nonsense. I don't think it is AI is going to solve climate change and discover new drugs. I don't see that being true. I think it will be an accelerant for certain things. I don't think it's going to be the end of us, but I think it's going to empower. I think here's what scares me. Let me put it this way. I'm not worried about AI. I'm worried about capitalism. Right? I'm worried about AI within a capitalist system that will burn the place to the ground to maximize profits. And the reason I'm worried about that is because that's what we've been doing for 20 years with social media. Why is social media so awful? Because they are burning the place to the ground to maximize their profits to buy a bigger yacht. Right? And they don't care what they do to individuals, societies, or democracies. And so I worry that without a regulatory landscape, which is what the government should be doing and has fallen asleep at the wheel at, the companies are going to do what the companies do, and we know this. And I think left unchecked, it's not AI, it's humans.
Yeah.
It's humans that scare the bejesus out of me. The AI is fine.
And I know that there would be lots of people in Silicon Valley who would push back and say,
Sure.
government doesn't know what it's doing. It
They're
doesn't know
wrong.
enough about what it's doing to
Yeah.
regulate effectively, and
Yeah.
it's going to just create more problems than
Yeah.
it solves.
Here's the problem with that story, is that the reason why the government is confused is because these people are spending millions of dollars sending people to Capitol Hill to confuse everybody. This is big tobacco and big oil all over again. You muddy the waters, right? What did big tobacco do for decades? They didn't say smoking doesn't cause cancer. They said, we don't really understand, don't overreact. That's the same nonsense you're hearing from Silicon Valley for the last 20 years. So I don't buy that story. And I can tell you, I spent a lot of time talking to politicians in Sacramento, in Capitol Hill, in Brussels, and in the UK, and they are not, well, some of them are stupid, but a lot of them are not stupid. I think they are being sold a story by people who have a vested interest in not having regulatory land. Regulation is good, and here's how you know regulation is good. Because a lot of people here are old enough to remember when we tried to put seatbelts in cars. And what did the automotive industry do? They cried like a bunch of babies for decades, saying this is going to destroy the automotive industry. It was a big fat lie. It was a big fat lie. Safety is good. Not killing us is good for business, right? Good, smart regulation is really good. And by the way, you don't even have to believe me. Go read the Biden executive order from October of last year. It's incredibly thoughtful, and it was pulled together in about 9 months. And it is really a thoughtful roadmap, and it was done in collaboration with our friends in the UK, our friends in Brussels, our friends in Australia. So I'm not saying that the government, is here to solve all our problems, but I think if we work together and not against each other, we can get the government to move in a way that puts reasonable guardrails, we have good innovation, we do good things for individuals and societies, and a bunch of people can still make money along the way. Mm-hmm. That's my story.
It's a good one, but but it doesn't seem like the ethics ever catch up to technology, and technology is only moving faster and faster, mm-hmm. right? And ethically, we don't seem to move faster. In fact, we seem to, drag our feet.
Yeah, I mean, so, we used to measure change in technology in 12 to 18-month increments, right? Now it's 12 to 18 weeks. And it is fast, and that does make it very hard. And the reason why ethics lags and regulation lags is because we don't know what we're doing. We don't know what this is yet. And it does take a little bit of time. Here's something I've been thinking a lot about, speaking of ethics, by the way. This is coming, by the way. It's coming in our lifetime. We are going to start to create digital avatars after people pass away. Because right now, we basically have the ability to take a body of writings or listening to you talk, put them into a ChatGPT large language model. You've got my voice, you have my likeness. You can open up an iPad and talk to a digital version of me interactively. I know, this one's just like, oh my God. But I'm telling you, you're gonna have to change your will to say, don't create a digital avatar of me. But this is coming. And a lot of people in Silicon Valley have been obsessed with immortality. This is what immortality is gonna look like, right? And there's some really interesting questions about that. Like, should UC Berkeley be able to use my likeness and my voice and my thinking to teach classes after I die? Like, that's weird. Interesting. Should my wife have a digital version of me afterwards? I don't know, but this is, yeah, so it's like, there's some weird stuff coming, and we dealt with this in the medical profession, right? But in the medical profession, I think there was a long-standing history of ethics in biology, ethics in medicine. We're a bunch of engineers, we're a bunch of nerds, nobody's thinking about this. And by the way, that's a failure of the university system where we don't teach these young engineers ethics. We don't actually spend enough time talking about philosophy and history and ethics. We're just learn how to code and go out and do some damage. Yeah. That's our failure.
By the way, I thought you were going to say, what does it mean for Elvis impersonators when we have those avatars?
That was a missed opportunity on my part. I know, that was a missed opportunity.
Okay, Emily, give me your... Oh, you turned it in. Okay. I'll take
I really
those
shouldn't
cards.
have said anything.
They might not have chosen your card. Okay, thank you all for submitting questions. I think this is probably you. I don't know. You talked about technological solutions, but what do you think about legislative solutions? Okay, we kind of
Good.
talked about that.
Yeah, let me chime in.
Yeah.
I think we need regulation here. I think it needs to be smart regulation. California has been really leading the charge, and I don't think it makes sense to do this at a state level, but if any state is going to do it, it makes sense for California to do it. I like a lot of the language that's come out of the UK online safety bill, the AI safety bill coming out of Brussels, and even the Biden executive order. The National Institute for Standards and Technology is propping up an AI safety institute within it to think about this. I think we need some guardrails. There is no industry where there are not some reasonable guardrails to keep us safe. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to say that this type of technology, and it's not just AI, all of it, needs some reasonable guardrails. But they have to be smart. And I think we have to do it in a way that is collaborative and not adversarial. And I think there's a glimmer of hope here that we might be able to do that.
Okay. What's the most surprising deepfake you've seen? And if I can add to that, have you been fooled?
The definition of that is I can't tell you if I've been fooled.
Right.
I mean, right. I think that video I showed you of the woman talking was the one that, it was very benign, but it surprised me of how good it was. Because I think if I had looked at that and didn't know, I don't think I would have seen it. Because a lot of the artifacts that I've come to know, like the throat doesn't usually move, the expressions are a little bit inconsistent, the mouth often is a little sort of off. The one comfort I take in that is Maddie, who's sitting right here as a student in my lab, his technology was able to detect that as a deepfake. So I take a little comfort in that. But I was really blown away by that. I've also really been blown away by the voice cloning. It is shockingly good.
Yeah.
Like it really surprised me how good it is. And I will tell you, we were just finishing up some experiments with Sarah, who's also sitting here. And we're always doing sort of sanity checks of our data, and we always look at things and we're like, okay, is this what we think it is? And we keep being fooled by our own deep fakes.
Yeah.
And that's really disconcerting. That's starting to really bother me. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you talk for a second about because I just think this is such a trippy idea, these adversarial networks.
Yeah.
That one generates
Yeah.
something and the other one is discriminating.
Yeah.
And
So there's different technologies to create deepfakes. One of the technologies are called GANs, or generative adversarial networks. They're sort of being built into what are called diffusion-based processes too. But let me talk about that because it's a really beautiful idea. So the first sort of really good deepfakes were all built on GANs. And the way GANs work is you take two systems, which are deep neural networks, that's the underlying neural architecture or computation, and one of them says, I'm going to make an image. And the way it does that, it just splats down a bunch of pixels, and it sends it to another network that says, is this a face or a photo? And that one says, nope, it's not, try again. And then the generator modifies some pixels and sends it back to the detector, and it says, nope, try again. And they work in what's called an adversarial loop. So the generator's trying to make an image that fools the discriminator. And the power of that is so incredible because all you have to do is give the discriminator enough examples that it can tell the difference. And so that sort of shows you the power of that. It's almost like it's nothing. It's just such a simple and elegant idea. And by the way, these systems are learning on top of themselves. And so one of the things we think a lot about when we create detectors is we want to make sure those can't get incorporated into GANs to then build better creations. So you have to think really carefully about how you develop these technologies. How do you deploy these technologies? Do you talk about them publicly? Do you release code? What do you do? Because fundamentally, this is an adversarial system. And so some of the underlying technologies are really beautiful and elegant and very, very powerful.
And if I understand it correctly, it's not like old-fashioned computer science where you could look at the code. You could see how you're getting your output.
Yeah.
You can't just lift the hood and say, okay, let's see what was the process.
Well, two things. You can lift the hood and see the process, but you can't understand it.
Oh.
So the networks are learning literally billions and billions of values, what we call weights, to a model. And so what it's doing is doing this GAN thing or something else, and it's learning this incredibly complex set of calculations. So I can look at the process and say, this is how it's doing it. But then once I unleash that network and I said, make this for me, I don't really know how it's working. And by the way, this is true because this happens every once in a while. Like a ChatGPT will go sideways and they'll ask Sam Altman, why did that happen? He's like, yeah, I don't know. And I'm like, that is not a great answer. Like, that's not what you want to hear from the CEO of OpenAI. It's like, yeah, we don't know. Like, these things they get a little weird.
Right.
And we don't fundamentally understand them, because even though we can look under the hood, they are doing such massive computations.
Right.
And we just don't really understand, like, why it's doing those things. And they have what we call emergent behaviors. They do things that are surprising. And that is disconcerting. And if there's ever a reason to have guardrails in technology, like if I told you your plane every once in a while is going to do something surprising, you'd be like, yeah, that's not okay, right? We're going to put some guardrails on that.
AI airlines.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, someone wants to know, how will generative AI models evolve once a large fraction of the images that they train themselves on are also fake?
Oh, man, that's a great question. So Maddie, who's sitting right here, did a really beautiful project this, I guess it was last year, on what we call nepotistic training. I know, sorry. And so what we did is, so what you should know about all these generative AI is that they have largely been trained on your data. Stuff that you have put on the internet, that media outlets have been, and by the way, massive, huge copyright infringement lawsuits are going to be, for years, for decades, going to be sorted out on what happens here. But largely on human-generated content. And what we were curious about, because now we're entering the age of generative AI, where a lot of content online is now AI-generated. So what happens, and by the way, the way the data comes to you is you just scrape the internet indiscriminately, billions of pieces of content, text, image, audio, and video. So what happens when you start grabbing in some AI-generated stuff? What we and other people have started finding with large language models and image generators is the models start to collapse, which means they start to create gibberish with as little as 3% of the training data, and in some cases with as little as a fraction of a percent if you are more adversarial in nature on how you attack it. If I'm a state-sponsored actor and I want to slow down OpenAI, you know what I do? I prop up a couple thousand websites with poison data, and I just wait for them to come take it. I don't have to hack their network. Just come take it. And I'm going to start poisoning your models. This may be a good thing, by the way. We'll see what happens. But some weird things are starting to happen, and there's a series of papers that have come out in the academic literature talking about this. And here's one thing I take comfort in this, is that I wish people would just do what I want them to do, but I'm also an adult, and I realize that doesn't always work that way. So what I like is when my interests and the company's interests are aligned. And in this regard, the companies are actively incentivized to label every single piece of their content so they don't re-ingest it in training. That's really good. I like for OpenAI to want to say, we want content credentials so we don't reabsorb this. And that may even be true for Elon Musk, because that means his models will also start to collapse. And that's good when our incentives are aligned.
This is a really insane idea. It hadn't occurred to me, but that it can pollute itself. That what it's being created is not good for it.
Yeah, and by the way, we don't know why. We don't know why still. Maddie's still working on it. And I don't think anybody does, by the way. The other papers we've seen, it's an observant. We observe the behavior, but we fundamentally don't understand it. Back to your question, because we don't really understand these models in a lot of detail.
Yeah.
So this is something that we're thinking really hard about, but we still don't understand it, but we have observed it, and it's very real.
Can you think of any other technology that humanity has created that's been like that?
I mean, there's a joke about the British Empire that's in my head, but I mean, but look, we know that when a species inbreeds, it's very bad for the species, right? Things get pretty weird.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sarah. Sarah's British, and I just made fun of her entire. So yeah, I can't think of another technology like that though. But certainly in genetics, we've seen that kind of behavior.
Yeah. This is sort of a media question, I think. Any chance that we can start moving away from a vast array of niche media markets and towards common sources of information, a la major networks in the 1970s? So back to the Walter Cronkite model.
Oh, man, I love that question. I grew up at a time where it was 3 news channels, right? And it was Walter Cronkite and Dan Rather. And look, I don't think it was perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than it is now.
Yeah.
And say what you will about the news, but here's the thing that you have to understand about news. Prior to CNN and Ted Turner, and he's not a bad guy, but prior to that, news was the price you paid for being on the airwaves. Why did we have news at 6 o'clock and 11 o'clock every day? It was because the government mandated that you have news, and that was what you did that for an hour, and then you got the airwaves the rest of the time. So that was your responsibility. It was never meant to be a profit. It was meant to be a service to society.
That was your peas and carrots, and then you could have
exactly, and then you can watch Benny Hill all you want. It was great. That's how old I am, by the way, is Benny Hill. And then there was also the fairness doctrine. right? Which Reagan pulled. The Fairness Doctrine said you cannot be hyper partisan. There was reasonable balance in news reporting. Ted Turner came along and said, we are going to monetize news. And I don't think he meant to destroy the media outlet, but I think he effectively did, because he told everybody else that news should be a money-making venture. And as soon as news is a money-making venture, things get weird, right? Because your incentive is very, very different than Walter Cronkite and Dan Rather. And I think that's been bad for us. Will we go back? I doubt it.
Yeah.
I doubt it. Because people like to be fed things that they agree with.
Yeah.
We know this. And by the way, that's not a partisan issue. The left is as guilty of that as the right is. And I think people don't want to go back to tell me what's actually going on, because it's less comforting.
So should there be a consequence? This is not a question from the crowd, but should there be a consequence for sharing deepfakes?
Wow, that's a good question. So the answer is yes, but there are some caveats to it. So for example, if you're creating child sexual abuse material, 100% you should go to jail. And it is illegal in most parts of the world.
And it is the most common use of deepfakes.
It is a common use. People are doing awful things with children. It's awful, awful, awful. I think the creation of non-consensual sexual imagery of adults is now illegal in about a dozen states here in the US. We are working on federal regulation to sort of unify that. I think if you take a woman's likeness and you put her into explicit material, that is not protected speech. And I think that should be illegal. And then we have to figure out what is it a civil, is it criminal? And I think we should think a little bit about that. But I think that should be banned. On the political front, it's obviously more difficult, because we should be able to criticize our politicians. And we can't say you can't create a deepfake of a politician. That would be silly. So here I have a very simple rule, which I just think we have to disclose these things. I think if you create a deepfake of a politician, it's fine, but I think it has to be labeled as that. Mm-hmm. I think there's a line that you cross. So for example, when the guys created the Joe Biden deepfake in New Hampshire telling people not to vote, that's election interference. And those, by the way, millions of dollars of fines have been now levied and felonies have been charged. So that, I think you cross a line. You can't interfere with the election. We need satire, we need humor, we need to be able to criticize our politicians. So I think with political speech, we have to be careful. Right. But I think there's other things that are unambiguous. Fraud is fraud. We don't have to create new laws for deepfake fraud. It's fraud, it's illegal. So I think we have to modernize on the sexually explicit material. The child abuse materials the laws are a little vague. They need to be modernized a little bit. And then on the political side, I just think we should have disclosures. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's perfect, but I think it gets us far enough there without getting into trouble with our free expression issues.
Okay. I want you to talk a little bit about your company, Get Real. By the way, I said if I was going to do this again, I'd call it Keeping It Real with HoneyFreed.
That's so good.
I missed that opportunity, but I wanted to share that.
Yeah.
But I'd like you to plug your company.
You want credit for it.
I do want credit for it, and if you use it, it's now filmed.
I understand. I understand. Yeah.
Tell us what it does,
yeah,
and why you think it's a good product.
Good. So this isn't a sales pitch. I'm not selling anything. In fact, we are not working with consumers. So I co-founded a company 2 years ago with some really, really smart people and a lot of really, really smart former students, which, by the way, is completely awesome. One of them is sitting right there, by the way. What we are doing is developing a suite of tools built on the work that we've worked on for now decades that would allow a media outlet, a law enforcement agency, national security agency, an analyst to ingest a piece of content, image, audio, or video, and we give you as much information as possible about that, by the way, whether it's real or not. You can see why this would be important for media outlets. You can see why it would be important for law enforcement when they're introducing evidence in a court of law, and certainly for national security. We're also building technology that would sit on Zoom calls and team calls so that when you get on a call, you know who you're talking to. You can see why Fortune 500 companies would care about this. And
saves you 10 minutes wondering whether Obama is really
that's
Obama.
Right, exactly. You just focus on what he's saying so you don't sound like an idiot. And then we're also doing some service stuff where we want to work with large agencies like a New York Times, a CNN, for example, where there's sort of three bins of content that happen every day. There's stuff that they can deal with, they don't need my help. There's stuff where they need a little bit of help from the technology and they don't need me. And then there's something like really like we don't know what's going on. And so we want to be able to be helpful to those organizations. The internal model I have in my head is 8 billion roughly people in the world. I can't stand between those 8 billion people and the truth and facts. But I can stand behind some really incredibly smart and talented journalists and investigative journalists and help them help the rest of the world. So I'm sort of behind your front line.
Yeah.
And so we want to help media outlets because we think that if the media can't get this right, then we're nowhere. We got to get that right.
Yeah. Last question. If we don't get it right, what does it look like next election cycle?
I mean, look, we got a glimmer of it, right? January 6th was a glimmer of it. And that was not a deepfake-powered lie. That was just a big, fat lie.
Right.
Now imagine that lie, which we know is coming if he loses, powered by audio of Harris saying we're going to rig the election, images of ballots being burned, state secretaries of state saying that they're rigging that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And you know this.
Yeah.
And you know that Elon Musk is going to amplify it to hundreds of millions of people. And Trump is going to amplify it. And January 6th, 2030 is going to look like a day in the park. So I don't think this is hyperbolic. I do think we are looking, I think if you don't have a shared sense of reality, you are looking at an existential threat to your society and democracy. We're not disagreeing about politics anymore. We're not disagreeing about philosophy. We're not disagreeing about ideology. We're just disagreeing on 2 + 2. And I don't know how we move forward like that. Like the political conversation, you should see the hate mail I get. It's amazing. It's amazing. Like it's detached from reality. Yeah. And I don't know how to have that conversation.
And what is the nature of it? Are they claiming that you're being alarmist for no reason? And
no, they think I'm part of the conspiracy to cover up. I mean, they think I'm part of some conspiracy. Some people think it's somebody. By the way, I've been accused twice in the last year of being a time traveler, which is very cool. Because if only. But this is what it is. Like literally, like somebody thinks I'm a time traveler, and that's how I'm doing. I don't.
Right. And I think back to your point about social media, even more than deepfakes, generative AI, have really polluted the political discourse, the public discourse, to the point where there is just so much conspiratorial thinking out there. Yeah. So we didn't need deepfakes to sow this kind of discord.
It's making it worse. It's jet fuel, and it's absolutely making it worse. But if you ask me if I had a magic wand and could solve one problem, it would be the social media problem, not the AI problem. Because I think that is by far and it's really, the thing you have to understand about that, it's not a bug of the system, it's a feature. It was designed to be like this because it's from the attention economy, right? It is designed to feed the most hateful, conspiratorial, salacious, outrageous stuff, because that's what and by the way, that's on us, because we're the ones clicking on those things, right? You can't really blame Zuckerberg and Musk for that part. Mm-hmm. Right? Because they are responding to what we are responding to. Now, I would say they have a larger responsibility as multi-billionaires and trillion-dollar valuations that they need to do better. But that's the problem, is that we are poisoning our brains, right? And look at the QAnon conspiracy. Some 25% of Americans believe the core tenets of the most bizarre conspiracy, and that's 1 in 4. That's insane. That's insane. I don't think that's being hyperbolic or alarmist. But of course, I may be a time traveler, so I don't know.
That's just what you would say.
That's what I would say, exactly.
Well, let me see. Let me do a time check. Yeah, I think we gotta wrap up. I guess it's I think you need to give us some words of hope and encouragement.
Okay. Hold on. I'm going to dig deep. Okay, here's something cool. So we've been talking about the bad effects, and we should talk about them, and we should figure out how to mitigate them. But no kidding, generative AI is amazing. So I'm a computer scientist and applied mathematician by training. I've been writing code for 30 years. I don't write code anymore without ChatGPT by my side, where it writes a lot of code. And the reason I'm saying that is that you don't need to be a computer scientist and a brilliant engineer to do really cool things now. You can do amazing things with ChatGPT if you just know how to ask it questions. And for me, that lowering of barriers of access to that is incredible. If English is not your native tongue, being able to edit your text to make it more grammatically correct is amazing. Being able to translate things into multiple languages is amazing. And so there is something to be excited here. I really think there is something exciting about the large language models and the chat GPTs that I think is going to change. I think we have to think carefully about what it means in terms of the economy and people's jobs and the fact that all of these things were trained on content creators, incredibly talented content creators without their permission. We have to think about that. But I think for us as users of this technology, I do think it's an enabling technology. I heard a great line the other day, and that I'm going to share with you, is that it's in the context of lawyers, but you can replace what I'm about to say, lawyers with any profession, is that AI is not going to eliminate lawyers from work, but lawyers who use AI will eliminate lawyers who don't. And I think that's true of just about every profession. I think if you don't figure out how to use this technology, you're going to be left behind. And that was true of computers too, by the way. Same thing, and the internet. So that's not a particularly shocking thing to say, but I do think we have to think about how to bring this into our educational. And the thing that's harder here, PC revolution was about 50 years, internet revolution was about 25 years, this revolution is 1 year. So we don't have the time to do what we did in the first sort of rounds of this. But I do think it is fundamentally changing the way we work and interact with the world in exciting ways and in ways that are terrifying and in ways that are unfair, and we just got to find that balance.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
With that.
Thanks, everybody.
So there will be a short wine reception just outside these doors here, and you're
Everybody
welcome
needs
to,
that. It's good.
Yeah. And thank you so much for coming, and I hope to see you again in the near future. And I just want to say once again, thank you so much to HoneyFreed.
Thanks, Matt.